And welcome back to the Jewish-Anglican. How you doing? Sorry about that. So yes, today we're dealing about Hanukkah and Jesus Christ. Everyone's favorite two things. So as you know, my channel, Jewish-Anglican, I am a Messianic Jew, specifically someone who really likes the Anglican denomination. And yeah, so I celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, which is very interesting, and some people are confused when I say that. Other people think it's cool. In fact, I made a friend recently, and she pretty much does the same thing, so that was fun to learn that, to meet someone that also does it. But first, we must explain, before the connections between Hanukkah and Jesus Christ, we will explain just Hanukkah in general. Hanukkah is a holiday where you have this thing called a menorah. Wait, let me actually get it. A menorah, right. So you see, the Maccabees in 146 BC, before Christ, or BCE, before Christian era, originally, there was a menorah with only 7 branches. But due to the oil lasting 8 whole nights, they added 8 and a middle one to help out the other candles. Makes more sense in practice than actuality, or it makes more sense in practice than actually trying to explain it.
The original 7-branch menorah actually is supposed to represent the 7 days of creation and the Sabbath, the day of rest, which is the middle one for some reason.
And it was during the month of Kislev, which is roughly around the winter month, which can really range between November. I thought we could read some interesting verses from the book of Maccabees. For clarity's sake, I am using the Illustrated Catholic Bible, and specifically the New Revised Standard Version. Which, yeah, this is my first translation of the New Testament, and upon looking further research, I don't know if it's essentially the best one, but it's the only one I have with Maccabees in it. So, we're going to read some Maccabees. For context, there's a king who has conquered the people of Israel once more. Take a shot every time that happens throughout Israel's history. And he's pretty much wanting to outlaw all of Israel's practice. Here is the verse. Then the king wrote to all of his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and all that should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many even from Israel gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Chapter 1 of 1 Maccabees, verse 41 to 43. As you can see, that's kind of the startup where there's this king, Antiochus, I really should have looked it up before filming, who very much wants the Israelites to conform to the traditions of said king, very much wants to abolish all the Israelite practices and worship more of the pagan gods, specifically Zeus, which, yeah, if I had to pick between God or Zeus, I think we all know who we're picking. But of course, there's many people who don't want to conform to the new pagan king and want to return and retain their traditions. But many in Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts to not eat unclean food. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant. And they did die. Very great wrath came upon Israel. As you see, pretty big deal to disobey the new pagan king. And the fact that some Israelites did conform is a great tragedy. Fortunately, there's a man by the name of Matthias and his 5 sons. This is also where we get the coolest Judas called Maccabeus. Also, we get another brother called Eleazar, which I wonder was an inspiration for Tolkien's Elisar. I wouldn't be surprised. They rise up along with many other of the Israelites to fight back and eventually retake the temple. And I would totally recommend you actually reading the book of Maccabees. Even though it's not considered scripture by many Protestant groups, it is still considered incredibly historically reliable for just what was happening in between the testaments. And it is generally a fun read, and I would love to see an actual good film adaptation of Maccabees, because I feel like out of any of the biblical inspired stories per se, this would be a great film, a part of the biblical, I guess, greater biblical narrative to adapt is Maccabees. But so eventually they return to Jerusalem and clean the temple. They rededicate it to God, and that's where the story of the menorah and the 8 nights originate. Now, to be fair, it doesn't explicitly state it in Maccabees about 8 nights in oil. They do say the oil burnt long.
Addendum, it does say about how they rededicated for 8 days long, or 8 nights long, in the actual text, which went over my head. So there is 8 nights/8 days that does happen, but it doesn't really seem like much to do with lighting the menorah and of the candles and the oil just yet. That comes a little later.
But I do want to talk about what happened, because it does become known as the Feast of Dedication. Let me read the whole passage from verse 36 to 59. Then Judas and his brothers said, "See, our enemies are crushed. Let us go up to cleanse the sanctuary and dedicate it." So all the army assembled and went up to Mount Zion. There they saw the sanctuary desolate, the altar profaned, and the gates burned. In the courts they saw bushes sprung up, as in a thicket or as in one of the mountains. They saw also the chambers of the priests in ruins. Then they tore their clothes and mourned with great lamentations. They sprinkled themselves with ashes, and fell face down on the ground. And when the signal was given with the trumpets, they cried out to heaven. Then Judas the Maccabeus detailed men to fight against those in the citadel until he had cleansed the sanctuary. He chose blameless priests devoted to the law, and they cleansed the sanctuary and removed the defiled stones to an unclean place. They deliberated what to do about the altar of burnt offering which had been profaned, and they thought it is best to tear it down, so that it would not be a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar, and stored the stones in a convenient place on the temple with him, until a prophet should come to tell what to do with them. Then they took unhewn stones as the law directs, and built a new altar like the former one. They also rebuilt the sanctuary and the interior of the temple, and concentrated the courts. They made new holy vessels and brought the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the table into the temple. Then they offered incense on the altar and lit the lamps on the lampstand, and these gave lights in the temple. They placed the bread on the table and hung up the curtains. Thus they are finished all their work they had undertaken. Early in the morning, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Chislev, in the 148th year, they rose and offered sacrifice, as the law directs, on the new altar of burnt offering that they had built. At the very season, on the very day that the Gentiles had profaned it, it was dedicated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals. All the people fell on their faces and worshipped and blessed heaven, who had prospered them. They celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and joyfully offered burnt offerings. They offered a sacrifice of well-being and thanksgiving offering. They decorated the front of the temple with golden crowns and small shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests, and fitted them with doors. There was very great joy among the people, and the disgrace brought by the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers, all the assembly of Israel, determined that every year at that season the days of dedication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Chislev. You can see that was quite a lot, but as you can see, you do see the ideas of the 8 days, but it doesn't directly say because the oil burnt for 8 days. Perhaps the oil burning came from a later story, but as you can see, pretty important holiday. The Israelites took back the temple from the sin of those who profaned it and rededicated it for 8 days straight. Beautiful story. Now, as you may know, Testament in the Feast of Dedication, which appeared in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 22. So yeah, Jesus, all the way into chapter 10 of the Gospel of John, has pretty much declared he is the Messiah, and to a greater extent, he has declared he is God. Arguably from the first chapter all the way through the 6th and eventually through the 10th, he keeps declaring his divinity. You could argue about maybe not in every chapter, but nearly almost every chapter he does it, at least from my readings of John, which I read John a lot. But around the 22nd verse, this is where Hanukkah is mentioned. At the time of the festival of dedication. So first, you notice we have that. So let's continue with this reading. At the time the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem, it was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple, in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me. But you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one." Of course, this responds with the Jews picking up stones and wanting to throw it at Jesus. What's important here is that this does fulfill a prophecy. Now, the book of Malachi, which is one of the prophets, does actually prophesy that the Messiah will be in the temple, which is great. That's wonderful. Jesus is fulfilling a prophecy within chapter 10 of John. That's wonderful. But what's even more interesting is that the fact that Jesus walked into the temple during Hanukkah is actually really cool when you think about it. Because Hanukkah is about the temple being rededicated from the sin that has been profaned in it. So to have the Messiah, literal God, walking into the temple during the Feast of Dedication, he is not just rededicating it for the Jews, he is rededicating the world. He is rededicating the entire world and cleansing it of its sins eventually. Well, eventually as in, soon to the next couple chapters eventually, if you know what I mean. Sorry if I stumble on my words. So yeah, him really walking into the temple is so cool because he's walking on the Feast of Dedication. He is just like the ancient Israel. In some ways, you could argue that the ancient Israelites, you could argue that the Maccabees rededicating the temple is a greater foreshadowing to Christ walking into the temple and declaring he is God. That is absolutely amazing. This might have been a bit of a shorter video with mostly just a lot of Bible verses that's thrown at you, but I hope you enjoyed because this is just a really cool thing I discovered recently and it just clicked my mind, and I hope you enjoy it because this is absolutely fantastic. And of course, Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas. God bless.